everybody. Welcome to Digital Boot Camp. So this week, obviously, we're not live. Had some stuff come up, but we are posting this right at 4, both on YouTube and IGTV. I want to let you know about another place, lhcstuman.com/media. It's another spot you can go to find all this stuff. So we're going to dive in Digital Boot Camp Session 2. Today we're going to talk about kind of the structure of the Bible, how it all fits and flows together, and then we're going to dive into the very first section of it. So a lot of what I am teaching you comes from a book called 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. So if you want to buy that book and go through this kind of alongside, that I would recommend that. These categories, these terms I'm going to use, they're not like inspired, they're not like written by biblical authors, but they are helpful kind of categories to think in. So if you're going to the physical, in-person JHM boot camp on Wednesday nights, the guy who's teaching on the DVD, it may use some little different terms, but that's okay. Like the big picture, the same kind of stuff we're still hitting on. So the Bible's broken up into 2 testaments, right? We got the Old, we got the New, all right? And so we're going to start by looking at what types of books or what types of writings we can find in the Old Testament, all right? So Old Testament kinds of works, we have historical books, we have poetical books, and we have prophetical books, okay? So historical is like what happened, okay? History. Poetical, poetry, those are books like Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And then prophetical, we got the major prophets and the minor prophets, and those are forecasting what's to come. Now in the Old Testament, in most cases, it's forecasting Jesus, but in a few spots it actually forecasts beyond Jesus. So some parts in the Old Testament are still applicable to what is going to happen in the future, like in Daniel and some other books like that. So we have in the historical 17 books, that's Genesis through Esther. We have the poetical, that starts in Job and it runs through Song of Solomon or Song of Songs. And then prophetical, which runs through Isaiah to Malachi, okay? So that's how Old Testament is broken down. In the New Testament, we have a similar kind of structure. Starts with historical, and then it is the Pauline epistles, okay? And so an epistle just means a letter, okay, or an instruction to a church. So any book written to like Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, that was written to Rome, to Corinth, to Galatia, right? And Pauline is just a descriptor, an adjective for the word Paul, okay? That means that Paul wrote this letter to this church or to these people. And then a general epistle is a same instruction, it just wasn't written by Paul, okay? So we have all the block of Pauline epistles, ordered from longest to shortest, and then general, longest to shortest. And then kind of lumped in there, but kind of different is the book of Revelation. And so it goes long to short, Hebrews to Jude, and then Revelation is, it's written to several churches, and it's also apocalyptic. So again, that's forecasting, that's future, okay? And it's broken down, historical, 5 books, Matthew through Acts. So we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Those are the 4 Gospels. And then Acts is the continuation of Jesus' ministry. The Pauline epistles, we have 13. That's Romans through Philemon. And then general epistles, 9, Hebrews through Revelation. With Revelation, again, kind of that caveat of that different style of writing, apocalyptic literature and whatnot. Okay? So how we're going to break this down is we're going to do different categories throughout Scripture. All right? And what I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you a figure, so a person, a central kind of figure to that time period. I'm going to give you a name for the period. And again, these are where there's kind of some interpretation. Some people may use different words here and there. Again, it's no like right or wrong. It's just helpful to categorize them in your brain. And then I'm going to give you a location. All right? Like where did this take place geographically speaking? And so, for example, if we were to do this with American literature, we would maybe say the period is colonial. The figure in that period may be Benjamin Franklin, and the location is Boston, right? So you learn this in American history. So we're just going to back up, and we're going to apply some of these same figure, period, location. We're going to apply some of those same things to the Bible, all right, to biblical history and to the biblical books that we find, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create an arc, starting in the beginning and running all the way from Genesis all the way down to Revelation, and put them in different historical categories all the way through. And I'm going to use a symbol, okay? Again, I borrowed some of this from that book, 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. But I'm going to borrow a symbol all the way through. And so if you're taking notes, which you should be, because remember, if you show us that you took 8 session worth of notes, we will give you a graduation gift for watching. But as you go, draw this little symbol. It shouldn't take super long, and it may be a little different than what I have here on the screen, but that's okay. So as we walk through the beginning of the Bible, it starts with creation, right? If you've been here this last weekend, you know we've talked about creation, and creation, the beginning, that's what we're going to talk about at the end when I get done kind of talking about the structure. Creation was God created the heavens and the earth. And so the symbol we're going to use for that is we're going to use the sun, okay? God created light and darkness. The next section is we have the patriarch period, patriarch. And so when I say patriarch, patriarch's a big word for like founding fathers, right? So one of the main patriarchs of the Jewish faith, and then also by extension of the Christian faith, is Abraham. So he's the patriarch. In your family, your father or your grandfather may be the patriarch, and your mother is the matriarch. Okay, so that's what that word comes from. And so we're going to use a shepherd, because Abraham and his kind of founding fathers, they were shepherds and nomads and stuff like that. Then we're going to use Exodus, right? So it's a book of the Bible, but it's also a time period. And we're going to use pyramids to kind of signify that, like that happened and they were exiting from Egypt. Then we're going to use a word conquest, okay? So this is the conquest of the land of Israel. So we're going to signify that with a sword. So go ahead and write conquest and draw a sword. I know I'm going fast, I promise. You can pause it if you need more time. Judges is the next period that we're going to look at. So we'll just use a gavel, right, like judges, and that's literally what they were. Like, they were judges. Israel didn't have kings at the time, they just had judges, and those were the biblical or God-ordained kind of people of the day. Then we're going to use kingdom, all right, and so kingdom is the time period in Israel's history when they had a king. So David and Saul and Solomon, and then down through that lineage as you get into 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, what's going on there. Then we have the exile, and the exile takes place when Babylon comes and conquers the people of Israel and brings them in exile over to Babylon. So that's Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, all these guys. And so we're going to use handcuffs to kind of signify exile, because they were taken into captivity, into slavery, into exile, all right? So that's the symbol we're using for that. Then we have the return. So they leave exile, right? They leave Babylon. They head back to Israel, back to Jerusalem. And so we're just going to use an arrow, a return arrow. So the people of Israel head back. And so we get Ezra and we get Nehemiah and some of those time periods. And then we have this silence period, okay? And so this period is marked by silence. And this is often referred to as the intertestamental period. So in between the Old Testament and before Jesus came, we have the intertestamental period where God was silent. He didn't use prophets. He didn't use anybody. He spoke to them for 400 years. Didn't speak to them for 400 years. And then we have the gospel, all right? And that gospel, literally the word gospel in Greek means good news, okay? So the gospel, or the good news, the message of Jesus, the hope of the world, the hope that we can put our faith in. So we find that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then we move on into the church. And so the beginning of the church is the book of Acts. And so it's the disciples carrying out the mission of Jesus. And then Paul's writings to the other churches as he established them, which also moves us into missions. And so in missions, we're going to use a world or a globe. And so that's Paul both carrying the message to those churches, and also it's the continuation of Jesus' commission to us to be missional and to live our light in a way that we are light before men, shining our light in such a way that they would see our good deeds and praise our Father in heaven, as Jesus reminds us in the Gospels. So the whole thing all together, like I said, we're going to create an arc, starting in Genesis, running all the way through Revelation. So quick hitter: creation, patriarch, Exodus, conquest, judges, kingdom, exile, the return, silence, gospels, church, and the mission. All right? That is your diagram. We're going to use that every single week. And so today is no different. Like I said, we're going to look at the beginning, the creation, for kind of our final 5 minutes. So what is the creation? What happened during that time? And what this really is this is an overview for you to understand Scripture, how it's put together, the order it's put together in, where the books are. But we're not diving into the weeds just yet. That's going to be for our second session of boot camp. That's going to be in the spring. And we're going to do an Old Testament and a New Testament survey where we'll dive deeper into some of the history and the stories and stuff that goes on. But right now, this is just a kind of big picture. Like, imagine you're flying in an airplane and you see the peaks of mountaintops. Like, that's what's happening. You're just seeing kind of the peaks of all these different periods, okay? So the creation, the central figure is Adam, right? God created Adam, he created Eve, but we're just going to say Adam is kind of the central figure. The period, again, we're calling it creation, and the location is Eden, right? So Garden of Eden and everything that happened there. So under creation, kind of create 4 bullet points, right? 4 bullet points, 4 main things I kind of want to highlight that happened in the creation period before we move into the next part of Genesis, which will be the patriarch, and that's next week, okay? So the first bullet is God created man in his own image. That takes place in Genesis 1 and 2. You see God first create the world, which we talked about this weekend, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We're going to talk about it more this weekend, so make sure you're back for that. But then, God created man and woman. And God created them in his own image. And God created us to be relational beings. So we're to be relational with one another. We're also to be relational with him. And that's a key important distinction in our worldview as of Christians versus some of the other worldviews that are out there. But we are created in God's image, and we are created to be in relationship with him. But then the fall happened, all right? And the fall is, you may have heard that in church terms, the fall is the fall of man. And so sin entered the world because the tempter, Satan, appeared as a serpent in the garden, and he tempted Eve and caused her to not rely on the word or instruction of God, but instead to rely and lean on her own view, her own understanding. And so she made a decision, and she caused humanity, herself and Adam, to sin. And the world, everything in the world has been marked and tainted by sin ever since that moment. This is one of the main cruxes of the entire Bible. This is the core central problem of humanity and the core central theme of the Bible. It is God's plan to solve this problem. What you may not know is in Genesis 3, chapter 15, God promises a seed or a future offspring to one day defeat Satan. And that future offspring we know to be Jesus. So even all the way back in Genesis chapter 3, we see the prophecy or the forecasting of Jesus, all right? So this is, again, the core central problem, the fall. How are we to solve this problem of sin that takes place within us? And so continuing on in that message, in the creation, we have the flood. So God saw that once sin entered the world. In Genesis chapter 6, we find Noah, and there were 8 righteous people. Noah, his wife, he had 3 sons, and they had 3 wives each. Those 8 righteous people he chose to save on the ark. He flooded the world because the world had gotten so wicked. And so Noah and his family, they survived. But even they weren't good enough as righteous men who found favor in God's eyes, Genesis 6 says, found favor in God's eyes. After them, there still was corruption and stuff that happened. And so in Genesis chapter 11, we have what's called the Tower of Babel or Tower of Babel. And that's where God mixes up their languages because they're going to build a tower to try and become as great as God or trying to reach the heavens. So that's a quick overview, right? Real fast. The kind of 12 different categories of scripture and history. And then the 4 bullet points in creation. God created man in his own image. The fall, when sin entered the world. The flood, Noah and his family. And finally, Tower of Babel. So, hopefully that was helpful. And hey, listen, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. And we'll see you all next week, hopefully live at 4 for Boot Camp Session 3. The next 3 sections we will cover. Until next time, see you guys. Have a great rest of your week.